thought they were going to give us a big stage this year.
Huh?
I thought they were going to give us the big stage this year.
Yeah, the problem is the noise up there, being able to hear stuff. Welcome back, everybody, to our seminar series here Friday afternoon, the Alabama Fishing Show and Expo. I'm Mike Gadsden, I'm the host for all the seminars. Aaron Churchwell is up next. If you guys want to learn how to catch some giant catfish, this is the guy to come see. I'm not talking about small catfish, I'm talking about 50, 60, 70 pounders and bigger. So here he is, Aaron Churchwell, and thanks to Bucks Island for putting these seminars on and streaming them live so all you guys can see it.
Yeah, first off, I want to thank Sheila, Mike, and all them for putting this on, the great city of Gadsden. Thanks for Bucks Island coming out and doing the videoing for us and everything. So, my name is Aaron Churchwell. I grew up in southwest Missouri. Grew up fishing for catfish for sustenance. I mean, we ate them when we were kids, and that was as far as it went. Back then, we caught fish up to 30 pounds, and to me, that was a giant. But I did 10 years in the Army, got out of the Army, I moved to Rome, Georgia, and got into stripe fishing, and part of the bycatch of stripe fishing is catfish, and started catching some pretty decent sized fish, and saw they had some tournaments here and there on it, and thought I'd get my feet wet in it, and the rest of it's all history. So, but today we're gonna talk about targeting big fish. A lot of people catfish, and every once in a while they'll catch a 50, 60 pound fish, and they just think they were in the right place at the right time. But you can successfully target fish of that caliber. The body of water has a lot to do with it. You guys live here local? Okay, so you guys probably fish Guntersville more than. Yep. And Weiss and stuff like that. So 48, that's a big fish for that lake. 52 is the biggest blue I've ever caught out of Weiss. 49, or no, 51 is the biggest flat I've ever caught out of Weiss. I actually hold the Georgia side record for flathead on the Coosa. But Neely is not, the Coosa chain in general is not known for giant fish. But I bet you couldn't believe it if I told you there was a 100-pound blue cat caught out of Neely Henry right here. Yep. So they're there, but they're not as prevalent as the Tennessee River. The Tennessee River has a better bait source, better food source for those fish. It's got better current, better moving water, better water quality. A lot of that goes into what produces those big fish. So when I talk about big fish is subject to the body of water you're fishing. So fishing Weiss, a 50-pound fish is probably as big as they get in that lake. There's plenty of shad in there, plenty of forage for them, but I just don't think they have the DNA to get that big. It's the same thing with a human. I mean, for example, me, I'm never gonna weigh more than 220 pounds. I don't care if I eat 5 times a day, every day, my body's just not made to get that big. It's the same thing with all different types of fish, all different species. Do what? I don't think I could eat 5 times a day. But just my body's built different. I have a higher metabolism, and it's just, you know, it's just the way I was built. And it's the same thing with these fish. Actually, the person that caught that 100-pound fish out of this lake is this guy right here. So he's pretty famous around here. But no, that's just every body of water, their big fish is different. It's comparable to that body of water. You go to Guntersville and 110, 112, they have the genes to get that big. They're not as common as 60, 70 pound fish, but the other difference too is what's considered a trophy to some people is different to others. You bring a 10-year-old kid out there, a 10-pound fish, that's giant to him. So it's all in who's seen it. But the first thing I want to talk about on targeting these big fish is the gear you have. So the gear that I use is my personal preference. There's no right, no wrong, no nothing. It's all comes down to personal preference. But what works best for me is a heavy rod. This one's actually made by Meat Hunters. Meat Hunter? Yep, they're out of Arkansas. They are made in the USA. They order the blank from overseas. It comes just a blank, 10-foot long blank. They cut it down to whatever action size of rod you want. And then you can build it however you want it, color-wise, option-wise, everything, whatever kind of guide you want, everything. So. Yeah, that's what a lot of people say. So a heavy action rod for targeting 50, 60, 70 pound fish and bigger. Your line, some people use braid, some people use mono. My personal preference is the way that a circle hook works. With braid, you take all the stretch out of the line, and the way that this works is it takes pressure to set this hook. So when a fish bites down on it, if you just yank, it's gonna pull it right out of his mouth. If you let the fish load the rod up itself and it slowly pressurizes, it slowly turns the hook in and then it sets itself. With braid, in my personal opinion, you take all that stretch out of it, so you've got a 50-50 shot. Either it's gonna catch him or it's not. So your line, that's personal preference too, but this is 40-pound mono. Some guys use 50-pound mono, some guys use 30-pound mono, just a heavier fishing line. The braid wise, a lot of guys use 65 to 80-pound braid. The reel that you use, you're gonna want something that holds that bigger diameter line and holds a good amount on it. If you use like a 200 series Akuma, the first time you break off, after you get hung up, you ain't got no more line on that reel. So having a good spool of line, holding a good amount of line, so that way, because where we fish for these fish, it's in the business. I mean, it's in the trees, in the rocks, in the structure. I mean, that's where these bigger fish live for the majority of their life. So you can try to fish out from it. You got to hope he's going to come out of it to eat it. Or you just throw it in there with him and hope you can get him to come out of it after you hook him. So having a good stiff rod, good line, just good tackle is what helps you successfully land those fish. Now, the type of hooks we use is a circle hook. So if you can see, that hook is bent back on itself. So what that does is that prevents that fish from swallowing that hook. So even if he swallows it, you have a really high percentage that's going to come out of his throat and go into the corner of his mouth. Like I was saying, you can't just set that hook because of the way the point is. So if you set that hook, it's just going to rip it right out, never get a penetration of the hook at all. So the way this hook works is fish comes up, grabs it, he turns around to swim. These fish are current oriented. So he comes up, grabs it, turns around to swim. What that does is that loads the tip of that hook into the corner of his mouth. So you can see as it starts to penetrate right there. As he turns and continues to swim, then it locks it in the corner of his jaw or around his jaw line or whichever. And then whenever he hits the backbone of the rod, that's what sets the hook. So you see a lot of guys on YouTube videos and stuff like that. When we have a bite, the rod's stationary in a rod holder. The rod loads up. When he hits the backbone, we reel down a couple times just to get all the stretch out of the line, get the hook in his mouth, then pick the rod up. If you just yank this thing, you're gonna miss him. So having the gear to target these fish is probably one of the biggest success rates that you'll have is having the gear capable of doing it. This is an Akuma cold water, holds about 800 feet of line, 900 feet of line, a 40-pound mono. Penn makes good reels. Shimano Takotas are a little pricey, but they're really good reels. Just an oversized bait caster works really good for a lot of us. You can still use open faces. I don't like open faces. I think when you're trying to store rods, they take up too much room, everything like that, so you can't fit as much in there. And plus you don't look cool throwing an open face. I said, plus you don't look cool throwing it open face. You may be asking what this peg float is on here for. So that's called a Santee Cooper rig. So when we anchor fish and you throw into that timber, there's a lot of misconceptions about these fish. Everybody, and we've all been taught this since we were kids. These fish live on the bottom of the river, they eat trash, they eat whatever they can. That's the furthest thing from the truth there is. We still don't have studies on these fish, so there's not a lot of known knowledge other than from the anglers that fish for them. There's a few studies done that they studied movement of these fish, but they didn't really study, you know, what they feed on, how they feed. I mean, this is the apex predator of the water system they're in. So that's the biggest, baddest fish in there. He's gonna eat whatever he wants. We'll get into that later. So this peg float, what it does is your sinker gets clipped on here, and then when you cast that out there, instead of that bait just laying on the bottom of the river, this holds it up in the water column. Gets it more eye level with that fish. What's crazy is, you know, we've always been taught that these fish live on the bottom of the river. I've actually got images of these fish in 60, 70 foot of water in standing timbers that these fish are 30 foot off the bottom in that treetop. So I think these fish utilize that water column a lot more than what we think. And I think the fish that we catch fishing on the bottom of the river, the only reason they're there is because of the structure that they live in. You don't have a lot of standing timbers in a river system unless a tree just ends up that way. So for the majority of the structure in a river system, it's all laying flat on the bottom. So those fish get in that timber and they lay down in there. But also, when you're talking about a 2-pound fish, barometric pressure and the different conditions, they don't affect those smaller fish as bad as it like an 80-pound fish. The air bladder on a 2-pound fish is about that big. So high barometric, it ain't got a lot of pressure on that. 80-pound fish, that's as big as a 3-liter bottle. So there's a lot of pressure on that fish's air bladder that I think that's why they utilize the bottom some, is because of the mud. They like to get down there in that mud, they lay there, let all the front push through, and then they move on about their business. So targeting these fish, your bait sources. So when we were taught about these fish when we were younger, they eat anything they will. Chicken liver, worms, all that stuff. When these fish get big, they eat whatever they want. No offense to the bass guys, no offense to the crappie guys. These fish eat your fish. I mean, they will eat anything that they can get their mouth on. I mean, it's the same thing with a lion. The lion's not picky. He's gonna eat a zebra, a warthog, whatever. I mean, these fish eat what's predominant to them at that time. So we have a saying in the catfish world called match the hatch. I'm pretty sure the bass guys say the same thing, crappie guys say the same thing. For crappie fishing and bass fishing, if you've got a bunch of little 2-month-old threadfin shad swimming around, you're gonna match that with your bait. So you're gonna try to get as close to what those fish are feeding on as you can. With us, it's the same way. In Georgia, it's legal. In Alabama, it's not. In Georgia, in the river system up there, in December, the crappie all start running up the river. We can legally use those as bait if we catch them legally. So in December time frame, crappies are really good bait. That's what's predominant in the river system at that time. That's what those fish that live in that river system are eating most of the time. It's the same thing with white bass. White bass in the springtime, they start running up that river. That's what those fish switch over to. Tennessee River's a little bit different. You can see it in the wintertime when the skipjack all disappear. They start eating gizzard shad. It's more predominant at the time. Those skipjack run way up in the backs of creeks. They get in that real shallow water. They're not where those fish are living at that time. So your gizzard shad, your threadfin shad, that's what they're feeding on more. In Alabama, I'm pretty sure they eat crappie and bass too, but we can't use it as bait, so we don't know. So, and that's one of the biggest difference too is our laws that we have to follow targeting these fish. I mean, every state's different. Like if I go to South Carolina, I can use crappie as bait. He's got to be 11 inches, I think, but you can only cut him one time. So you have to take an 11-inch crappie and make 2 baits out of it. And if game warden pulls up on you, you got to be able to put both those pieces of bait back together to show that's an 11-inch fish.
So if you got fish that you catch and each one hang on that crappie, you got to
Throw the other half out or use it as bait and hope you get hung up when the game warden comes. No, I'm just kidding. So it's different every state you go to. Some states, so in tournament fishing, we have length limits. So it's not like if it's a 3-fish limit, you just go catch the 3 biggest fish you can. Alabama has a 34-inch rule. Thank Alabama all the time because they're the ones that started regulations on catfish. So you're only allowed 1 fish over 34 inches per angler per day. So in a tournament, if you have a 2-man team, you're allowed 2 fish over 34 inches. So the 2 biggest fish you can catch, and then one of them has to be under 34 inches. So Tennessee used to be 35 inches. South Carolina used to be 2 over 34 inches. Oklahoma is 30 inches. So there's a lot of states that are finally adopting some rules and regulations to targeting catfish. I'll get into a little bit of conservation here. Commercial fishing is still a real thing. I mean, we see it on Weiss, we see it on Neely, not as much anymore, but it's still a thing. I mean, we see it up on the Tennessee River too. If they can deplete the ocean of fish, it don't take much to deplete one species of fish out of a river system, especially with the dams that we have now. I mean, those fish are locked in there. So unless they go through the floodgates or through the spillway or through the lock system. So that's another thing that I hope conservation department gets on board with and try to put limits on them too, so that they're not out there just targeting trophy fish. Because like I said before, not every fish is capable of getting 100 pounds. So if you go in and you have a commercial guy that's pulling a bunch of 80-pounders out every day, you're ending that gene pool of that fish that has the DNA to get that big. So I'm not saying we don't need commercial fishing, because I think it's a very viable income for a lot of people, and I think it's still needed at some point. I mean, especially with how everything has gone to catch and release. I mean, when I was a kid, nobody knew what catch and release was. Everybody kept everything they caught. So with all the catch and release that's going on now, I still think that there needs to be some fish pulled out. I mean, if you look at a pond and you stock a pond and it gets overpopulated, it starts stunting the growth of fish. So I think it's the same thing with our natural resources in their natural habitat too. So, but with targeting those fish, having the key bait at that time of year is a big thing too. Predominantly on the Tennessee River, skipjack herring is, you know, the #1 bait up there until you get into the colder months and they start switching over to gizzard shad and suckers and stuff like that. So going into bait size. So we've always been taught that them fish, you know, they eat a piece of chicken liver or a couple night crawlers on a hook or anything like that. This is the saying I told him last year. We went and fished a tournament right here on Neely Henry, and still can't believe we didn't win that thing. But we got out there that morning, and I pulled my 3 rods out, and I had a double hook rig on, so I had 2 hooks instead of 1. And he cut his bait up, and I said, "Don't cut mine. Lay me 3 red horse suckers out there." These red horse suckers are 2.5 pounds. He said, 3 of them? I said, "Yeah, I'm putting them on a hole." And he goes, "You're wasting bait." And I said, "We'll see about that."
You caught 50 like 5 minutes later.
And I put 3 whole 2-pound fish on there, put them out there, and caught a 51, 52,
30,
a 37,
number that
and
I
a
don't think was bigger than it.
and a 15-pound fish. And I turned around and looked at him and I said, "You ever seen a catfish swim around with a fork and a knife?" Those fish are used to eating that stuff. So, I mean, they are opportunistic. If a fish gets close enough to them, they're gonna take the opportunity to eat it. So I honestly believe, and the bass guys are the same way. I mean, they change presentations, and if you look at the evolution of bass fishing in the last 20 years, the way the baits have changed and the way the bites change on certain baits, those fish get smart. They get coded into seeing that same plastic worm over and over, and they know better. Hey man, I bit that thing before and it bit me back. I don't think I'm gonna touch that one again. I think it's the same thing with our fish. I mean, these fish live 25, 30 years. They've seen a piece of skipjack before. They've seen a cut up piece of skipjack before. And that's what really changed the way I present bait to them. They ain't seen very many whole fish swimming by them that they ain't ate. So I started running whole bait like that, just fillet down one side, put 2 hooks in it, and you'd be surprised. You catch a 5-pound fish or you catch a 80-pound fish. So I think that they're just very opportunistic. I think they're very smart too. I think they know better. I think if you catch a 100-pound fish, that one that you caught ate a bluegill, piece of cut up bluegill, I bet that fish won't eat a piece of cut up bluegill ever again.
He's still alive. He's definitely a big one now.
Yeah. So, you guys have any questions so far? That depends on the time of the year. I think these fish utilize all the different parts of the water column, even shallow water. I won big fish on Texoma one year at a Cat Masters tournament. In 18 inches of water, I caught a 61-pound fish. That's what I got pretty known for around here. These guys got used to me big fishing, catching a bunch of fish. Back then, this guy looked at me and goes, I ain't fishing in 4 foot of water, ain't no fish up in there. He's got it in his arsenal now too. Learning the time that this fish utilize that stuff, that's a big part. Springtime like this, we got weather like this, and we've got influx of water coming in a creek system or a slough or something like that. It's stirring up all that mud back there, all them bugs, all the little pieces of seed and stuff coming out of that. All that stuff's getting washed in there, which the bait fish are in there feeding on, which those fish come in there and feed on too. So I think if you can catch a 61-pound fish out of 18 inches of water, I think they fully utilize the water column and all of the body of water at some point throughout the year. Hot time of the year, I'm gonna try to find flowing water and a little bit deeper water. So cold fronts are different. I mean, it's all about time on the water. Spending time on the water and learning how those fish move and how those fish react to different conditions, different water flow, different water clarity, all that stuff is what you learn spending time out there. For the most part, yes. Skipjack you catch on rod and reel, brim catch on rod and reel. If I'm fishing in a state it's legal, I'm fishing crappie on rod and reel, but shad, red horse suckers, stuff like that, you catch in a cast net. If you catch them on a rod and reel, now they did pass a law a couple years ago where you cannot transfer it from one body of water to the next. The Asian carp issue we have in the Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio, lower part of the Tennessee, it's real. And a baby Asian carp right next to a shad is very hard to tell the difference. So just tell the difference between a shad and an Asian carp when they're babies. So like if you go up to the Tennessee River and you catch a bunch of gizzard shad, because you could catch bigger gizzard shad up on the Tennessee. I mean, they get 15, 16 inches. But we don't hardly ever see shad that big down here, but they work better. They hold better scent. I think it triggers something in those bigger fish a lot easier because it's a bigger profile bait, everything like that. But there are Asian carp in Guntersville and all that. So if you go up there and catch shad and you have some Asian carp in there and then you bring them down here to the Coosa and fish with them, and what you have left at the end of the day you throw in, now you just populated the Coosa with Asian carp. So I can see why they put that law into effect. So, but.
So on your, I'm sure you use electronics.
Yeah.
Or not, but what do those big catfish look like?
Actually, I have some pictures. So you can actually tell a catfish on side imaging compared to other species of fish. So that one's, it's hard to tell, but you can see how much bigger that fish looks than
Oh, yeah. See, we-
other fish. So that one's hard to tell. He was probably moving as I scanned him.
Kind of electronic view.
I run Garmin.
Garmin.
Yeah, if you ask me, there's no difference. I mean, it's all back to personal preference. So that's a bunch of smaller fish. I mean, those were all probably 15 pounds. You out of here? All right, man. See ya. But yeah, you can definitely tell on side imaging what those fish look like. So, but we utilize the imaging the same way that the other guys do. We haven't had anybody really break down live scope and 360 live or anything like that yet. We do have guys that use it for catching bait. Makes it real easy catching gizzard shad. I personally want to buy live scope and utilize, because of how shallow I do fish, utilize it to try to target those bigger fish. Because my belief on that is once your boat is past him and you see that fish on side imaging, you've already spooked him. So the odds of getting him to eat are a lot lower than if you can see him out in front of you and throw a bait to him. So my buddy actually has a video on Tawakoni. You remember a couple years ago when Texas like froze over for like 2 weeks and like everybody was losing power and water and all that? We had a tournament right after that ended on Tawakoni. And he had a video of the panoramic view out the front of the boat. And there was 20 fish in front of his boat that were 30, 35 pounds. And he would move forward with his boat and they would all move forward. He never seen a single one of them on side imaging. And he would stop and they would just kind of come to a coast stop and just lay there. And then he'd start moving forward again. And if he got too close, they'd shoot way off and get away to where you can't even see them on side imaging. So, I mean, that was a real eye opener to how sensitive these fish are to the boat too. So you can ask these guys, they've all fished with me. We get in shallow water, don't drop a weight, don't nothing. We quiet, we sneaking up on them. So just sound travels a lot further in water as it is, but now you're in shallow water and I think it travels a lot faster and a lot further. So we fished a tournament, when was that, Robert? Last year on Toledo? Fished Toledo Bend, and we never fished deeper than what we could anchor the boat with the back motor. So we would trim up, move, and then stick the motor back down in the mud to anchor us up. And we were casting out to them, and day one we had, 120 pounds and 5 fish. I mean, we never caught big fish, but we caught numbers of fish. And then day 2 was a little rougher, but. So I honestly think that those fish utilize more of the water column than what we could ever think. So. Any other questions? The easiest way I could tell you to learn is just spend time on the water. Every day is like a puzzle. You take that puzzle and mix up all those pieces, and as you're out there, you're just slowly putting those pieces back in place as long as you're picking up on the little key pieces that the fish are giving you. So. All righty, guys. That's it for today.
Appreciate it. What
No
kind of
problem.
reels did you say you had?
These are Akuma cold waters.
Kuma?
Yep, they're about.
All right, guys. We will be back in just a little bit. The next one up is at 2:30, and I believe it's with Mike Delvisco, another sonar lecture, and it's a good one. It's a good one. So look forward to seeing you back